Hello, everybody, and welcome to our today's webinar on women's strikes and the power of solidarity. We are giving a couple of more minutes for our audience to get online and also for one of our speakers. By the moment, I would like to say that you will find here below at your screen the options for you to choose your language. We will be having presentations in both English and Spanish, so please choose your language. I would like to check if those Spanish speakers, are you listening to me into Spanish? Can you please answer in the chat? Are you hearing to me in Spanish? And are you hearing to me in French? And in Arabic? Are you hearing to me in French and in Arabic? Okay, it seems that we have all our 4 languages set. So we will start now. Hello again, everybody. I am very pleased to welcome you to our webinar on women's strikes and the power of solidarity, confronting systemic oppression and taking action in the face of global crisis. I am Viviana Osorio from ESCR-Net. I'm the coordinator of the Women in ESCR program. ESCR-Net is a network integrated by 300 organizations, social movements, and individual members across 80 countries seeking to build a global movement for social justice. This is the first of a series of webinars we will be doing in the aim of building our shared vision of a feminist world of work. In this webinar, we are aiming to create a shared understanding of the effectiveness of strikes in amplifying important issues and bringing about change, but also, crucially, uniting people through solidarity. We have invited great speakers, not only across countries and regions, but also across the struggles. Women from feminist movements, from trade unions, from movements promoting climate justice will be with us today. We hope to create a space for reflective dialogue between the speakers regarding what they have learned within their movement. We will also share the Women's Global Strike campaign and our invitation for you to join this campaign, its origins, its direction, and we will be inviting our speakers today who have led or been part of historical strikes across the world. We are having 6 very powerful speakers. I will introduce each of them at the moment of their intervention. Each of them will have up to 8 minutes. And I will write for you in the chat when there are 2 or 1 minutes left, so you can wrap up your respecting interventions. And hopefully, and if we have time, we will have some space for some questions from our audience. Our audience will write the questions in the chat, and by the end of our webinar, we will be asking the speakers to address these questions. So I would like to start with Claudia Lázaro. Hello, Claudia, and welcome. Claudia is the Secretary of Human Rights and Gender at the Sindicato de Obreros Curtidores de la República Argentina. It means the trade union of the leather industry in Argentina. She's the president of the National Coalition of Women Trade Unionists in Argentina. She's also part of the National Network Against Violence in the World of Work, which is a national coalition of trade unions for human rights. She will be sharing with us her experience in bridging feminist movements and trade unions for women's rights. So, Claudia, I will leave the floor to you, and you have 8 minutes to do your presentation. Thank you.
Hola, buen día. ¿Me están escuchando bien?
Hi, good morning. Can you hear me? Hi. I would like to know if you can hear me. Okay. Good morning, good afternoon to some of you. I am very happy to take part in this webinar. And it's important to make a distinction between the word strike and stopping your activities. A movement called Ni Una Menos, or Not One Woman Less, was born in Argentina in 2015 as a result of the high amount of femicides we had that year. One woman was being killed in Argentina per day as a result of violence against women. Although we have a law to prevent, sanction, and eradicate violence against women, this doesn't imply that we have realistic figures about cases of femicide. As a result, every social organization got together so that we created a coalition, and we created a movement to make this problem visible. In 2017 and 2018, we had a series of assembly meetings called the National Women's Coalition, and here the women workers groups participated, and they called for action. We had the participation of the Corriente Federal de Trabajadores, where we created the union, the women's union called the Central de Mujeres Obreras. During those assemblies, and while discussing male violence, we came to realize that it was important to see how neoliberalism affects women in a very particular way. So, the first thing we did in 2017 was to write a motto that was "Not a woman worker less." We called for a strike in 2018, and we were able to gather all the centrales obreras, or the workers' unions. But when we talk about efforts done from the unions, so we also realized that we were only including women in the formal working sector. However, we decided that we also needed to join efforts with women working in the popular economic sector. Our position was very clear. We were against the neoliberal government, and we also wanted to make women visible as well as violence at the workplace. We also wanted to make visible the precarious social security system towards women. And a particular thing that happened to us was that according to the International Monetary Fund, we had to make certain adjustments, but we said that we were against those adjustments, the adjustments of the International Monetary Fund against Argentina. I want to mention the highlights of our shutdown. First of all, we put every woman worker at the same level, regardless of whether they are in the formal economic sector or the informal one. We also called for action women leaders to narrow the wage gap and to make visible the fact that the world of work cannot exist without women. We also discussed the different problems that women face at the workplace, and we have been able to take steps against specific measures that were affecting women, but also unions violating their right to organize, to protest, and also the fact that the government is persecuting unions. All of these mottos synthesize the violations that that workers are suffering from, and that prevent them from moving forward. Here we have a social security system that we need to pay for every month. And with this voluntary payment scheme, women from the informal labor sector can also have access to rights. This was also an accomplishment of our movement and the call for the International Women's Strike. It's important to mention that strikes are not uniform. Strikes are active but different at every workplace and home. For example, some colleagues organize meetings at their workplace because they cannot have assemblies, and they do not have the right to protest otherwise. In other places, we did have shutdowns, meaning that women stopped working for a certain number of hours and then went out and to take the streets. We also had demonstrations at the National Congress as well as the presidential office. I believe that in Argentina, We have been able not only to do this, but to bridge feminism with unionism. Because, for example, when we would talk about workers' movements, we didn't talk about feminism, but right now we have come to understand that bringing these two classes together furthers our empowerment, and that there is not a feminist struggle if we do not include workers as well. Because there is no gender equality if we do not contribute from a social society, from social movements to feminism and equality. A great Argentinian thinker said in the 40s that there won't be social equality as long as there is not equality at the workplace. I think this is all I have to share. And I would only like to add that when we talk about formal workers, it's not only workers in the private sector, but also the public sector. I work in the private sector, and we have had the chance to hold strikes because we convinced other associations, and we entered into strategic partnerships with our male counterparts. Thank you.
The floor to Sarojini Rengam. She is the Executive Director of Pesticide Action Network Asia and the Pacific, which is a regional network working towards the elimination of the hazards of pesticides and the promotion of sustainable agriculture, PANAP. This network has more than 100 partners, mainly from the people's organizations and civil society organizations, and is committed to advancing food sovereignty, gender justice, and environmental sustainability. She's a zoologist, experienced in facilitating gender training and leadership building of rural women, and was instrumental in the formation of the Asian Rural Women's Conference and Coalition, which brought together more than 700 women representing 150 organizations and women's movements from 22 countries in Asia Pacific region. So Sarojini, I would like also to ask you, in your opinion, what is the importance of striking to advance women's rights? And also I would like to invite you to tell us about experiences of women-led rallies and protests to advance women's rights you have led or been part of. And what have you achieved through using strikes?
Actually focus on the women farmers and the agricultural workers, and that's where our partnership and strength has, collaboration has emerged. And I think one of the important aspects of the work has been that women are the ones who feed the world, and they are the main producers of food and fiber. And one of the big threats in the 90s when we started the work was WTO, the World Trade Organization. And immediately after 5 years, we were getting messages that from the ground, women were being impacted because of WTO and the whole globalization process. So APWLD, the Asia Pacific Women Law and Development, and PAN-AP worked together to build capacity to do the documentation on the ground in terms of impact of the globalization, and particularly in the agriculture agreements, the agreement on agriculture. And out of that, we were able to build capacity, but also have the impact documented very well, and focused on food security of women farmers as well as agricultural workers. So we brought this, a better understanding to different arenas at the global level. The first one that we went in with a big contingent was the World Food Summit in +5 in Rome. That was where we had massive demonstration to talk about food security. But for PAN and APWLD and all the women that were part of our partnership were talking about food sovereignty, because it was not enough to look at food security, but food sovereignty. And here we had a big postcard campaign. More than 70,000 people actually wrote in asking for change, for food sovereignty, and women's strong support for women and as farmers and workers. So we marched down FAO and handed over the 70,000 postcards calling for that kind of demand, and we carried all those boxes to the Director General, and we were singing the song, "We will overcome, we will win the struggle." That was very momentous, and everyone was, felt the need to move forward in terms of food sovereignty. So then we organized this big people's caravan that went to 13 countries in Asia, 3 countries in Europe, where we actually had massive outreach, organizing people, having seminars, workshops, bus stop. We stopped at the bus stops, giving speeches. We had marches, demonstration, because we felt that the need for food sovereignty, the women's food sovereignty, was important. And people had to understand what this food sovereignty is. It's the right of people to decide on food and agriculture, and not to have WTO imposed on us and trade agreements. This was an outreach of 1 million people from the streets, from in halls, in rooms, workshops, and it traveled all over Asia, and it culminated in Nepal. And finally, Nepal actually then, after a lot of struggle, has food sovereignty in their constitution. So that was for us a very vital to move forward. And the next big event was the WTO Ministerial Conference in Hong Kong. And we had, again, tribunal. APWLD organized the tribunal that found WTO guilty of the kind of impact on women. We had marches, demonstrations, until people from Hong Kong started to support us. They used to come to our conferences and give us warm clothes, because they felt most of the Asians coming from hot countries did not have proper warm clothes. So that was the kind of support. And when we were marching, there were women and people along the streets waving to us, calling for support, and it was tremendous. And after Hong Kong, actually, WTO did not have the push, and so trying, a lot of the agreements failed after Hong Kong. And one of the outcome of that was the US and Europe and all the developed countries started to push what we call the regional trade agreements, as well as bilateral. So it moved from a multilateral to bilateral to regional. And we had the TPPA, and then now the RCEP, the regional, cooperation in terms of Asia-Pacific economic partnership. And that, I think, is where China is playing an important role. And women continue actually now to organize and build their capacity to strike, to demonstrate, to march the streets to stop this kind of intrusion. And because for them, it's not a question of just impact, but it's really an impact on their lives, their livelihoods, and this is a tremendous impact that they would not be able to survive. So that's why, in a way, that the fight is intensifying. And so you can see that for women who are the producers of food, the dumping of cheap food actually affects them. Their whole livelihood is gone. It affects their environment. The use of highly hazardous pesticides becomes the norm, affecting their health. And I think finally also the seeds has to be in their hands. And so that's one of the demands. And it's a continuous struggle and strike. But we have seen that if we are united, if we are in collaboration and in partnership, that we can shake the world and we can make changes, although it's small, but it has a tremendous impact on women on the ground. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sergini, for a great presentation, for a very inspiring intervention. Following, I would like to leave the floor to Veronica Montúfar. Veronica is the Gender Equality Officer at Public Services International, PSI. This is the Global Union Federation for Workers in Public Services, with more than 100 years of existence. PSI brings together 700 trade unions representing 30 million workers in more than 154 countries. They stand up for quality public services for all, trade union rights, and a fair share of working people the world over. They struggle to amplify the voices of workers in this sector, including women workers. She's a sociologist, researcher with very relevant experience in training and organizing strategies with women in the context of work. So welcome, Veronica. Hi, Veronica. Can you hear me? I will leave the floor to you again to start your intervention. We are very looking forward to hear your vision regarding to women's strikes, some experiences of strikes you have led or been part of, and what are some successes? What is this that you have achieved in past strikes that you would like to share with us? I will leave the floor to you again, starting now. Okay, it seems that we are having connectivity issues with Veronica, so I will welcome Aida LeBlanc in the meantime. So Aida, she's a trade unionist and a women rights activist. She represents low-income workers in the informal sector, in particular domestic workers in Trinidad and Tobago. Apart from her trade union activity, she's led many campaigns and mobilizations for the rights of domestic workers at the national, regional, and international level. She's a very active leader at the International Federation of Domestic Workers, IDWF, and was actually one of its co-founders. She has served on several tripartite boards in Trinidad and Tobago as well. So welcome, Aida. We would love to hear about your visions regarding to women's strikes, as well as some experiences of strikes and some successes, some learnings from you in this kind of processes. So welcome, Ida.
Thank you very much. Well, our union, the Domestic Workers Union, we started a strike in somewhere in 1985 because we joined with an international organization called the International Wages for Household Campaign that was based in London, and we started a chapter in Trinidad and Tobago calling on government to count the unwaged work of women, because that was spoken about in the Beijing Platform for Action. So we had these strikes on the 24th of October, which was United Nations Day. Every year we will hold a strike, but we call it Time Off for Women. And we call all the women, domestic workers, low-income workers to come out and join the strike. Put on your broom, put on your mop. You know, that was the call that we were making towards the low-income workers to come together. But we did not invite any politicians. What we did is we made a report, and we would send and tell them all what happened at the meeting and what domestic workers and unwaged workers were calling for, because they had their demands. Because in Trinidad and Tobago, domestic workers, they consistently report low pay, lack of payment towards the national insurance contributions on their behalf, denying them the rights to social security benefits under the national insurance scheme. They also complain of abusive working conditions, sexual harassment, you know, poor working conditions. When they are injured on the job, they can't get redress, because you see, in Trinidad and Tobago, a domestic worker is not considered as a worker. And what is sad to say, tomorrow the government will be holding consultation to include, requesting to include, to carry to Parliament, to include the domestic workers under the Industrial Relations Act of Trinidad and Tobago. And the National Union of Domestic Employees was not invited. So you see, we have to deal with so much politics in our work, in fighting for the advancement of women, in fighting for better working conditions. So at that time, the strike was important to us, and we got the an independent senator, Diana Mahabir Wyatt, who carried that struggle for us in the parliament, because we thought that if government recognize the unwaged work of women in their homes, that means that they would acknowledge that the work that domestic workers doing for pay in people's home is work. But we got the act to pass, the Unremunerated Work Act, which calls on government to count all the unwaged work of women. And it requires the Central Statistical Office and other public bodies to produce and maintain statistics relative to the counting of unremunerated work, and to provide a mechanism for quantifying and recording the monetary value of such work. But we still we still are not recognized as workers, even though the government is saying, yes, the unwaged work in the home is work, housework is work. They still refuse to recognize domestic as workers, because the IRS says that anybody who works in and around the household and paid by the householder is not considered as a worker. So if you do the same work in a public institution or in a child care home, taking care of the elderly or children, you are considered a worker. But if you go and do it in somebody's private home, you're not considered as a worker. And today there will be, after our years of struggle and fighting tomorrow, they will be having consultation on that issue, and nude is not invited. So we must strike. We must strike because we do not know what government now will be coming with. And you see, when we got this Unremunerated Work Act, we were able to get the support of the women's movement, but we never got the support of the trade union movement. So later on, because you see, this issue was always looked upon as a gender issue, they will call it a woman's issue. You know, even though we follow all the laws of the trade union and we operate as a trade union, we still are looked upon as a woman's group because we are run by an all-women's executive. So we want power and we want to see this strike happen, because the strike will bring visibility to the housework, in particular for domestic workers, whose work is not acknowledged as work. So we feel the strike is important. We used to host a lot of time off for women every year, and we will get the majority of the low-income workers who will come out. But usually we wouldn't get the support of other women. We had one woman who was the head of the network of NGOs here in Trinidad, Miss Clarice Manswell, deceased. She would always come and support us. But we couldn't do it without the women's movement. So we had our allies in there who supported us from the beginning, and we called on them, and we eventually got the support, because when they was bringing the bill in Parliament, we were all able to go out there to show support for the independent Senator Diana Mahabir Wyatt. But the thing about it, when we got this act, it more helped the upper class women who were fighting, even though they in marriage lawsuits where they were just housekeepers, and they were now saying, no, these women have to get half of the husband property, because that work is considered as work that they were doing in the home, because we had the Unremunerated Work Act, but yet down below we didn't get that kind of policy to deal with our work. So we continue to fight and struggle, and even when we were in the forefront in fighting for the C-189 at Geneva, on the 16th of June 2011, we jumped for joy when it was passed. We got the convention and we C-189, and we got a recommendation 201. We jumped for joy. We say Freedom Day for domestic workers. But here in Trinidad and Tobago, we are still not recognized as workers. We cannot take the government seriously now because we are in election mode. So they could bring anything to Parliament and it remains right there. We don't know if we will continue with the same government or we will get a new one. So these are the things that hamper us in our progress to get recognition for domestic workers and to get a better life for all, because the ILO speaks of decent work for all, not for some. So we want to see domestic workers and low-income workers enjoy decent work, good conditions of work. Right now, people, workers are complaining. They are no longer paying them for all the hard-earned benefits that we have been able to get for the workers. For example, pay for public holidays when you stay home on a public holiday and it has no work. They stop paying people for that. And nothing is happening. Government is not listening to what the low-income workers are saying, you know, so that these workers continue to be deprived of the benefits in the workplace, in particular for the national insurance. This national insurance is the biggest evil for domestic workers, because when they reach 60 years, they are unable to get their pensions because the employer has not paid the national insurance on their behalf. And we continue to call for monitoring investigation of employers who hire domestic and low-income workers. And now we have an influx of Venezuelans in the country, and we have to also address the problems of domestic workers. But then we have the language barriers, you know, so it's a lot of support is needed for us to carry on this work in Trinidad and Tobago, you know. But when we used to strike, what we did, we used to send out, all right, my time is over. Thank you very much.
Sorry, Aida, and thank you very much for a great intervention and for sharing about domestic workers' struggles there in Trinidad and Tobago. It seems that Veronica is not with us yet, so I will continue by introducing Melania Chiponda. She's an African feminist activist who has worked in the African region and Zimbabwe on women's struggles against land grabbing, energy poverty, climate justice, and extractivism as a model of development. Women's right to development is at the core of Mela's research and advocacy work, which engages with the global extractive sector from a women's rights perspective. So Mela, thank you for joining us today. We would love to hear about your vision of the importance of strikes to advance women's rights, and also some experiences that you would like to share about achievements while striking for women's rights. So I am leaving you the floor now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Viviana. Thank you, everyone, for joining this call and for listening to my presentation. So I am going to be presenting on the work that we have done in Africa as well as in Zimbabwe, where I am right now. I think strikes are very powerful actions that can be taken by women. But the most critical issue that I have kind of learned from history and from our experiences is that they take all different forms, and what works in one context may not work in another context. And the biggest challenge that we are having in Africa is the issue of extractivism. And when you are challenging the extractive sector, you are challenging power. And the sector is extremely dangerous. The sector is very dangerous because governments, as well as very big multinationals, transnational companies, they are working together with government to take over land from people, to take over the commons, to take over, for example, rivers. Right now, most of the big rivers we have in a lot of countries in Africa, they no longer belong to the communities, but the government the governments in Africa, they have given them over to multinationals, particularly the mining sector, which uses a lot of water, as well as uses a lot of energy, therefore depriving women of the use of their rivers, which I think is actually violence against women. It's a form of violence when women are deprived of the use of their water sources, when women are made to live in energy poverty, when all the energy is being used by the extractive sector. I think it is very violent for women. And one of the things is this model of development where in Africa there's a lot of extraction taking place, and not only extraction of minerals, but as well as extraction of the labor of women. I'll give you an example. In Zimbabwe right now, we are having a lot of energy issues, electricity issues, and women have to subsidize government by way of providing for energy themselves, providing electricity on their own, because all the electricity is being used by the mines. The mines are the biggest consumer of our electricity, and therefore women are made to go and look for alternatives. But what has really worked for us mostly is there is need always to build a movement, a critical mass of women who can be able to articulate as well as to have a common understanding of where the challenge is. And we do it by way of popular education. We also use feminist participatory action research as a tool for organizing, and also as a tool of critically looking at women's lives, what actions they would like to take, and also reflecting on their lives, like thinking through what their lives are now is not the only way that women's lives could be. And one of the issues as well is there is a lot of the space for women to organize is shrinking. It's shrinking in a lot of countries in Africa, and it's shrinking more in the extractives where there is mining. Women find it very difficult to organize because the mining sector is extremely violent. It is violent to the environment. It is violent to our rivers. It is as well violent even to the women workers who are working there. And it is extremely violent to the peasants because they lose everything. One of the most powerful strikes that we have had in Zimbabwe was a sit-in where women's land was taken, where women lost a lot of the agricultural work in Zimbabwe. It is happening in rural areas. More than 70% of the food we are eating in Zimbabwe, it is coming from peasant women. And therefore we had these, the Marange diamond mining operations, which took over everything from the women. And there we had been putting pressure on government, having meetings and also having a lot of discussions on the way forward. And the government was not listening. And a lot of the women that we were in the struggle with, they were arrested, they were facing interrogations, there was a lot of harassment. And therefore what we just decided one day is, let us go and occupy the offices, the government offices. We're not going to be fighting with anyone, but they can take over the land because they have taken already. And let us just go and sit there. So we did that during the time when there was the SADC meeting in Victoria Falls in Zimbabwe, and the heads of state were in Zimbabwe, and then we just decided this is the time, let us go and occupy the government buildings. And therefore women went there in their numbers and their children. Women went there to cook there, to use their bathroom spaces, to light their fires there. And the government managed to provide houses in just 2 weeks. They provided houses, they built schools because they had also destroyed schools. The government as well went on to build clinics in that area. And within a month, that infrastructure was put in place. That was, of course, a win, but there was also a lot of victimization of some of the women. And from there, what we decided was, we are not going to have like a chairperson or a president. I'm not saying this is wrong, but in our context, that can be extremely dangerous because we realize that the government is just targeting the leaders of our movement. And every now and then we always used to be called in for interrogation, and then we ended up focusing on how do we get this person out of police custody. And therefore we just decided, okay, we are going to have a very flat structure. And in other countries as well, in Nigeria, I've had women doing very powerful actions in the Niger Delta because of the pollution, the oil pollution during the time, and in Uganda as well. During the time that the government officials, they just go there, the women refuse to talk. They just sit there and then they refuse to talk. It has been very powerful in Nigeria, and it has been very powerful in Uganda, in the Albertine Graben, where women are facing challenges because of the oil extraction. And lastly, let me just say, it is also extremely critical to have solidarity actions, which should be done in consultation with the women who are taking those actions. Even solidarity actions of other strikes. For example, if a company is coming from the US or it is coming from Asia, it would be very powerful if the time that women are doing those actions in Africa, and then there are also actions which are taking place in other parts of the globe, and also even being able to provide, for example, legal advice and legal services. That is all I can say now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mela, for sharing around these struggles. Now it seems that Veronica is with us. As mentioned before, she is the Gender Equality Officer at Public Services International, which is a global trade union of workers in the public services sector. So, Veronica, I would love that you share with us your opinion regarding to the importance of striking for women's rights, and about your experiences in striking and some of the achievements that you have gotten via striking. I will leave the floor to you now.
Muchísimas gracias, Viviana, y mil disculpas por los problemas que hemos tenido.
Thank you, Viviana, and thank you everyone for your patience in view of the technical issues we have had. In terms of the strikes we have organized, we organized a strike on the 23rd and 24th of October of 2018 in Glasgow. This was an effort to further solidarity, as well as to draft a proposal for the strike, as well as to call for citizen participation, so that that strike would be known and heard of by the people of Glasgow in Scotland. More than 8,000 women stopped working those 2 days, because they had been fighting for 14 years before the courts for gender equality and equal pay. So during these 2 days, it became evident that there are certain sectors, such as catering as well as cleaning services in Glasgow, that are dominated by women. And the purpose was to file a complaint before the court, because these jobs were not being properly recognized. So what they would do is to request, for example, that night shifts would have a higher pay because they had a higher value. The claim also sought to consider that there are increased risks for women than there are for men in certain sectors. So on the 23rd and 24th of October of 2018, this strike was held, and it did have an impact that was evident in January 2019, when the government of Glasgow said they would give 500 million euro to pay for the 12-year debt they had towards women, because their job had not been taken into consideration in its full extent. So the strikes are very powerful tools, particularly during certain moments, particularly when there are very heated moments in the context of labor. So the example of the strike in Glasgow gives us an example of an effort that should have had an impact from earlier years, but it didn't, even though this strike happened in a country that has a very strong institutional basis. So what women did was to make this problem visible before society and have an impact on the government as such. So the conclusion of this strike was the restitution of the women's rights as well as the wage that they had not been paid for 12 years. This effort was carried forward even more when the government said they would redefine the categories for each position so that people get equal pay for equal work. And this shows that historically the work of women has been or has not been considered. This was an example of supreme solidarity, an example of a collective struggle. Strikes are not something someone else will do for you. Therefore, its outcomes are yours. And it's women workers who prepare and carry strikes forward. In the process of a strike, we are in touch with one of the most evident forms of democracy, and the strike made a 12-year struggle visible. And it managed to raise awareness, but also to create a breaking point in political terms. That is why strikes in this sense are a radical tool for change. That is why I believe that we should give not only political power, but also the power to create new partnerships. But it is also a tool for collective love and collective transformation. So strikes are essential in every struggle, and it is important to look at the Glasgow Women's Strike as an example of how a strike happened, and then a proposal was filed before the government, and that is how we started engaging in dialogue and also confronting the government and other stakeholders to start creating a solution for the problem. The aftermath of the strike should also be as a continuous process, because it is a stage where there is transformation that we should also take advantage of and value. So my main message would be that the strike is the top tool we have to promote and further our struggles. Thank you.
Very powerful ideas and experiences from our speakers today. It's been mentioned how strikes are a very important collective manifestation that belongs to workers, that leads to new relations of solidarity and love, how it is so important to connect struggles, to build connections among struggles. This idea, this very powerful idea that all women are workers. So the strikes as a concept and the strikes as a collective act, it belongs to all women. The importance of having allies to strengthening the struggle, how the strikes are important to confront power, and also how it's been used to confront stereotypes and to promote and defend the value of the work that women do. How it's very important to develop and advance specific strategies depending on the context and articulate strategies and organize together to promote the different demands. It was also shared how strikes have been used to move forward the implementation of human rights standard and also its recognition, and even to promote access to justice and very important rights as the right to equal pay for work of equal value. So after listening to these very powerful interventions, I would like to welcome Sanam. Sanam is the program officer for APWLD, grounding the global program, coordinating members' engagement with international processes and building capacity of women in Asia Pacific to advocate for women's fundamental human rights. Sanam has 7 years of experience in print and broadcast journalism, as well as documentary film work, and is part of APWLD's campaign team initiating the call for a women's global strike on 8 March 2020. And this is what I would like to invite to Sanam to talk about, to share with us about the Women's Global Strike campaign. What is this campaign about? How this campaign might be important, and how can we engage in this campaign? So, Sanam, I will leave the floor to you, starting now. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Viviana. I must say that I feel so emotional listening to the previous speakers and their stories, because in a way, the question you have asked, the why of this call for a women's global strike on 8 March 2020 is answered from their presentations. It is about women's struggle. It is about women workers. It is about women's livelihoods, their access to land, their access to water, to the rivers, and the state of democracy as a whole. It's not just what Veronica has said about the realizing of direct democracy through women's movement and people's movement, but there are studies that show that there is a correlation between inequality, misogyny, sexism, and the quality of democracy. And I think I want to also recognize we are at a very extraordinary and difficult time in human history, in environmental history, shall we say. Tomorrow there's going to be a climate strike, the part of the youth climate activism that's really fighting for action and trying to save the planet. And all of these things are interconnected. Women's work is underpaid and undervalued. Women's bodies are beaten and killed. And those same oppressors are the ones that are so greedy that they're destroying the environment without caring about what comes next. That's the reality of Bolsonaro in Brazil making deals and letting the Amazon burn down for profit. It's those same kind of oppression that hurts indigenous people, that hurts women, that hurts our planet. And it is with that recognition that my organization, the Asia Pacific Forum on Women, Law and Development, which is a membership-led women's organization, had thought, and this is going back a few years ago, it really started this conversation in 2014, a year after the Rana Plaza disaster. So definitely it came out of a strong sense of how women workers were affected. But little by little, we saw that it's really about the systemic change that we need to call for. And we recognize that not a single right, not a single freedom that women have today was given to us. It came because of the legacy of the movement before us, because of the feminists before us who fought for us and sacrificed for us. And that's why it's not just that we're coming back to this understanding that we need to be in that struggle and we need to show solidarity and love for each other, as Veronica has said, but we also need to act and link arms and take advantage of the technology, the connections that we have today. It's a privilege to be able to speak to so many people at the same time around the world right now, and we can do something together that strengthens our work, that amplifies our fight and struggle together. The other part of the why, I think, is why 8th March 2020. As I said, this sort of thinking and call for the women's global strike was coming from that recognition of her story of the women's movement, that 8th March is a radical day, a day of women workers protesting and fighting for their recognition in so many ways that Ida has captured in her experiences in Trinidad. And that's why we said 8th March, but 2020 also has another significance. And I also noted that Ida talked about 1985, which is the year of the Nairobi conference, the Third World Conference on Women. 10 years after that, in 1995, there was the Fourth World Conference on Women, or the Beijing Conference. And that is the space that feminists brought together, helped to draft the Beijing Platform for Action, which is considered a landmark document for women's rights. And that is turning 25 next year. And a lot of the work that UN agencies and governments are doing is about commemorating, celebrating, and not really recognizing that the struggle continues and the oppression has not gone away. And in 25 years, in a whole generation, not many things have changed. As Ida has captured, that her own union, even today, is not being invited to the crucial meetings that they have been advocating for. So these are the recognitions that we're trying to bring forward, and connecting with a wide range of issues. The inequality that is more deeply felt by marginalized people, of the fight for the environment and the destruction of the environment that we know affects women more deeply. And the fact that it will fall on women, it will hurt women more every time we sacrifice for profit, for greed, for luxury. Something like an austerity measure is taking the assumption that women are going to do the extra work. Cutting public services is making an assumption that women are going to do the unpaid care work and replace the space that and give the space for the government to dedicate resources elsewhere. These are the realities that we're being faced with today, and we need to fight back. And that is why that is the why of the date and the formation of this campaign. And also kind of the thinking behind this slogan, if women stop, the world stops. Because from what everybody has shared, I think we recognize that we really do everything. And when we have put together this campaign, we said that it doesn't have to be that you march on the street. There are many forms of protest. And one of the most extraordinary things that we can do as women could be just to not do the work. As Ida said, put down your broom, put down your mop. Don't cook, don't clean, don't pick up your kids from school. See what happens if all women do that for one day. And it is about power, it is about love, it is about solidarity. And I'll just take another few moments to share how you can join and participate in this campaign and how it's working. So first of all, I'm sharing in the chat box the link to the campaign website. And we're working on having this translated. At the moment, though, the political statement that's recognizing these structural issues, this fight against capitalism, this fight against inequality that is taking advantage of women and destroying the environment, that part is there. Our political statement is translated already in several languages. And we ask that anybody that wants to join the campaign endorses this, and we invite you to join our mailing list, our calls, our planning. But it is, apart from this sign up, it is very open-ended. All of these designs, the flyers, I'll hold this one up, for example. With Viviana's hard work, we've been able to translate this into a few different languages as well. All of these flyers, all of these signs, every design is available on our website for you to download. You can take it and put your own issues, put your own sort of call for action within your local context, because we know that women's oppression and women's struggle has different forms and different contexts, and it's important for you to decide how you want to express your strike, how you want to express your resistance. So we are welcoming your ideas. We're welcoming the women's movement for us to come together and to hear each other's stories, because one of the things that I think is so important and is not given enough space is how within the people's movements, different types of people's movement, one important thing that we do is that we bear witness to each other. Because many of us have stories that our governments don't want to listen, the corporations don't want to hear, they do everything that they can to silence us. So one of the most powerful things that we can do, not just to hold hands and strike, but to listen to each other, to recognize each other's struggles, to recognize the injustices done to each other. And that is what the kind of space and campaign that we're trying to create. And we really would love to welcome more and more of you on board. Although right now we're talking about build up to 8th March 2020, it's just 6 months away, really. This is also about bringing together the women's movement globally so that we can support each other as these spaces become more difficult, as new laws get passed, as more and more women workers are being restricted in different types of special economic zones and labor rights free zones. There's all of the mechanism of oppression is so complicated that we need to unite to fight it together. And that is what we're inviting you to do with us. And as I said, the previous speakers really exemplified that this is a struggle of generations, of women who have come before us, and the women, most importantly, who are going to come after us, who are going to lead from the fight that we put forward. So I'll stop there. Over to you, Viviana.
Thank you, Sanam. Yes, we are all very excited about the Women's Global Strike, and we really hope that a lot of social movements and organizations across countries, across regions really engage into this campaign. So we want to kindly invite you to navigate the website, to link the website of the campaign with your own websites, to share with others, to share within your organization movement, to share with your allies, and invite others to be part of this campaign. We will have 10 more minutes for questions. So I would like to invite the audience and the other speakers to write down your questions in the chat. For the questions to be addressed by the speakers that we have today. In the meanwhile, I would like to say that in order to promote political education and debates, also as part of this campaign, and to contribute to shape our shared vision of a feminist world of work, we are inviting to join a series of webinars, being this one, the first one of the series. The next webinar will be held next Thursday at the same time that today's. And the next webinar will be on connecting struggles to address corporate abuse, women's stories of resistance across regions, and the binding treaty on enterprises and human rights. We have seen and also experienced how corporations abuse is ending up in very important human rights violations and on disproportionate impacts on women and on climate change and on harmful being done to nature and to the environment. So we are inviting very strong speakers to share about the impacts that they are seeing at their communities of being caused by corporations and by the power of corporations and by the phenomenon of corporate capture. We will be having very strong leaders from indigenous movements, from indigenous communities, from peasants communities, from trade unions as well. So we'll have strong leaders from the social movements and affected communities. And also we are inviting very strong feminists who are very engaged in the process of shaping a binding treaty on enterprises and human rights, who has the power to make corporations, to hold corporations accountable in relation to human rights violations. So is there maybe any question that we have now from the audience? Please write it into the chat. Okay, not yet. I am sharing by now the information about the webinars that we are doing, the webinar series to advance our analysis, our shared vision of a feminist world of work, and to keep inviting movements and organizations to join the Women's Global Strike campaign. So maybe if any of the speakers would like to raise her hand to say something else. I would have an additional question. So I would like to ask what kind of strategies can we use to ensure the participation and leadership of women workers across different sectors? What strategies can we use to provide engagement of women across struggles to join this campaign? Who would like to answer that question? Okay, leaving the floor to Staro Jenny.
We work with plantation workers, and they are not really organized, and so it's more difficult actually to get them involved in this campaign and continue the strike. But they are at the local level being organizing themselves. And I think it will be a much more slow process actually to get them organized and join a global strike, I think. So one of the, even the recognition of agricultural workers and plantation workers as workers often is not even in the understanding laws, policies, and as well as I think the migrant workers who are working in this sector in the plantation and as agricultural workers. So it's a slow process, I think. There's very little global work that unites these plantation workers, and often when we think about workers, they don't figure in the statistics, because sometimes it's even worse in situations of informality and contract work. So I would like to maybe suggest that more it's I think more important and urgent that we connect with the local organizations that are working with women, and bring them in the fold, and kind of organize in a very systematic way, not only at the national level but also at the regional and global level. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. I think that's a very important point in the challenge that we have now about taking this campaign to the ground and sharing with diverse movements at the community level. I will leave the floor now to Claudia, who also wanted to answer this question.
Hola, sí, creo que perdí.
I think I'm hearing myself, but if you can hear me, what we have done in Argentina is work in each one of the provinces. Argentina has 24 provinces, and there are assemblies where we have the presence from all sectors. We have people from the formal sector, from the popular or the informal sector, and I believe the process that was created in Argentina is a very important one, because we started as a grassroots effort and then we scaled up until we reached the higher levels such as unions. For example, in 2017, when we decided to hold the women's strike, we went to the unions to call for their participation, but they didn't want to participate in the beginning. So to us, it was essential to do this, to take it to our own areas of impact, such as our schools, our houses, our workplaces. And so we would tell every woman not to put down their brooms, to leave cooking aside, and it was very important to make women visible, because even that day someone had to cook and someone had to go and pick up the kids. And that is how we have managed to get our male counterparts more involved, and that is why I want to invite you to see what we are organizing for March 8th. And the participation rate has been extremely important. We also share information about why we hold these strikes. We share this information in mass media, or in the mass media that give us the opportunity to speak, and we also use social media. So, I would say that first we need to be in touch with our fellow women workers. So we also need to talk to the media, those that are either feminist or that support feminism, to make this problem visible as a global issue. Since the 50s, We have fought for remunerated domestic employment. Silvia Federici continued this struggle in the 70s. So, in order for this struggle to be one that manages to make visible the economic value of women's work, it is essential that we start talking to women about this. That is why it is essential to have horizontal assemblies and not coming like missioners that wanted to spread the divine word with others. We need to have a horizontal approach.
And calling for mobilization. Ida was asking a question. She wonders if March the 8th will be great, given that that is a Sunday. So I don't know if somebody would like to answer that question. Maybe Sanam, would you like to say something in response? Okay, leaving you the floor now.
Thank you. It's great that you've raised this because this has come up a couple of times. So of course, Sunday, I think, is actually good in some ways because there are lots of associations of migrant women and migrant workers who it will be easier for them to participate and organize something if it's a Sunday. But at the same time, I think we also need to recognize that not everybody is doing a Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. So actually, Sunday is still a working day for many women in many realities. One of them being retail workers, service sector, the domestic workers that so many of us have been talking about. All of these women workers will around the world still be working on a Sunday. And then, of course, we have to recognize that many countries don't observe Saturday, Sunday weekend. Some of them do Friday, Saturday, and I believe in Iran they do Thursday, Friday. So recognizing the global nature of women's lived realities, I think it's going to be an interesting day because it will be a day that those of us who have that type of Monday, Friday job can step back and organize an event of some sort, can get a permit at the local park and have a public event. But we can also make sure that we make space for other lived realities and other forms of protest, whether that's wearing a red rose or leaving work early. There are many ways of protesting. Even if you have to go to work, you can slow down your work. You can refuse to do the care work at home and say that it should be someone else's responsibility that day, in a way that was just mentioned about giving the responsibility to our male allies to step in so that we recognize that. So that's a little bit of the discussions we've been having about the importance of it being a Sunday and the opportunities that will come up because of that day. Thanks.
Thank you, Sanam. That's a very useful response. And thanks to each of you to have joined our webinar today. We are very looking forward to reconnect next Thursday to speak about how to connect struggles to stop corporate abuse and to hear the stories of women confronting corporate abuse and to know more about this process of the forthcoming binding treaty on enterprises and human rights to be adopted by the UN, hopefully. So thank you very much for your engagement today. Thank you as well to our great speakers today. It's been great hearing to all of you in your very inspiring struggles. I wanted to say that the recordings of this webinar will be shared for you to use it as well within your organizations and also to spread the voice about the campaign. So take care. See you soon. Thank you very much.